Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Paris Schutz will join us in a moment. On the show tonight,
that looks to me like a pretty flagrant violation of this rule.
A nonprofit CEO's appearance in a campaign ad is a window into how healthcare and politics at Roseland Community Hospital have become entwined.
An area that's been disconnected for 60 years now is being connected to the city.
Big news for Altgeld Gardens. The Red Line extension passes City Council.
People are losing their equity year in and year out.
Is Cook County's delinquent property tax sale process illegal? Details on a just-filed lawsuit. The last 2 weeks of the year can be a deadly time as heart attacks spike. Why that's the case and what to look out for.
I'm Angelito, and coming up tonight, I'm taking you up in the sky to one of the city's most visible public art murals.
He's been in sports broadcasting for 50 years and calling play-by-play for NBA games for 25. Chuck Swirsky is here to talk about that and his new book, Always a Pleasure.
Brandis Schutz live from Altgeld Gardens on the far south side, right off 130th Street, where the new terminus station for the Red Line South would be if that extension does indeed come into fruition. The chances of that have increased exponentially after yesterday's City Council vote to approve nearly $1 billion in city subsidies for that project. So we'll get into the history of Altgeld Gardens, and there's a lot of it, and how the Red Line South extension could impact this community. But first, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. And now to some of today's top stories. Illinois lawmakers heard from leading gun violence researchers today as the General Assembly considers new gun control measures. The proposed bill would ban assault-style weapons and large-capacity magazines.
Because of the accessibility of high-powered weapons and magazines that allow killers to mow down 13 women and children and one man on Halloween night in East Garfield Park, more than 50 people in Highland Park. Oftentimes, communities are blamed and shamed. Something for us to consider is that what kind of common sense society are we creating for our children now that gun violence is the leading cause of their death?
Patterson, who you just heard from, says Chicago neighborhoods such as North Lawndale and Austin are seeing a reduction in gun violence as community organizations collaborate against it, but is calling on lawmakers to, quote, pull their weight. A first of its kind in the Midwest, Chicago is opening a cannabis research institute. The city and state are partnering with the Discovery Partners Institute, part of the University of Illinois system. The goal is to advance public knowledge on scientific and socioeconomic impacts of cannabis usage and production. Mayor Lori Lightfoot said in a statement, quote, this is a tremendous opportunity to not only promote Chicago as the center for highly demanded cannabis research, but expand the breadth of knowledge and science needed to shape policy. Leveraging and coordinating our city's resources to create a top-tier cannabis research center will make waves in this new industry and set the precedent on cannabis research nationally. As we near below freezing or a below freezing streak starting tomorrow, the city's emergency management department is warning residents to get prepared and stay alert. For updates on hazardous weather conditions and emergency alerts, Chicagoans can sign up at notifychicago.org. For lakefront notices, including flooding, text Shy Lake to 78015. Meanwhile, the city will continue its operation of warming centers whenever temperatures are 32 degrees or below, and warming areas are open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., while libraries and park facilities can be used on the weekends. Up next, actions by the CEO of Roseland Community Hospital raise some legal questions regarding his involvement with political campaigns. WTTW News investigates right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Roseland Community Hospital has long struggled to keep its doors open. The safety net facility on the far south side has faced shutdown threats and financial shortfalls. It's also facing a whistleblower lawsuit in federal court, claiming Roseland was complicit in a scheme to bill for millions of dollars in unnecessary or fraudulent COVID-related care. The hospital and its CEO deny any wrongdoing. But there are other questions about hospital leadership. In partnership with ProPublica, Chicago Tonight's Nick Blumberg has been investigating how healthcare and politics at Roseland have become increasingly entwined. Nick.
Brandis, hospital business going to friends and associates, employees and contractors donating to the CEO's political funds, using the hospital's name in a political campaign. That's some of what we found looking into Roseland and its president and CEO, Tim Egan. In addition to his role at the hospital, Egan also holds the elected position of Second Ward committee person for the Cook County Democratic Party. He declined an interview request, but his spokesperson told us that Egan, quote, has an excellent relationship with his board and keeps board members fully apprised of all of Roseland's major contracts and business developments, oftentimes to seek their advice and approval. Similarly, the board members are updated on his efforts to establish strong government contacts to support the mission of Roseland Community Hospital. But nonprofit experts say Egan's appearance in a campaign commercial last month appears to violate federal law.
Susanna is a giant for saving the new Roseland Community Hospital.
That's Roseland Community Hospital President and CEO Tim Egan appearing in a campaign ad for recently re-elected State Comptroller Susana Mendoza. Her campaign says Egan's referring to Mendoza's work speeding up Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements, a key source of revenue for Roseland, a nonprofit safety net hospital. But Loyola University law professor Sam Brunson says in the tax code governing nonprofits,
there's an absolute prohibition on endorsing and opposing candidates.
Egan's clearly identified as the hospital's CEO, standing in a hospital setting in front of people in lab coats.
It's not him saying the hospital endorses her, but it's him saying, I am the CEO of the hospital. I'm speaking in my capacity as CEO. That looks to me like a pretty flagrant violation of this rule.
In a statement, Mendoza's campaign manager said, quote, Roseland Hospital plays a critical role in providing health care to the underserved communities on Chicago's South Side. So we asked Tim Egan to attest to the comptroller's work in our video spot, which ran this fall. We would have never asked Tim to do anything we thought would pose a problem for him or the hospital. Egan's spokesperson did not specifically respond to a question about the ad. The commercial wasn't the first time Egan's used his position as part of Mendoza's campaign. Egan co-hosted a $250,000 to $5,000 a ticket fundraiser in May at the swanky 95th floor signature room of what was once the John Hancock Center. An invitation billed the event as an opportunity to join Roseland Community Hospital President Tim Egan for a Healthcare Heroes reception in support of Susana Mendoza.
That looks a whole lot like an endorsement, and it looks like an impermissible endorsement.
Neither Egan nor Mendoza's spokespeople responded to a question about that event. Egan's long been active in politics. He was elected Second Ward Democratic Committee person in 2016. Before that, he made unsuccessful runs for 43rd Ward Alderman in 2007 and 2011. At the time, he worked for what was then known as Norwegian American Hospital, which he cited in a CAN TV interview as part of his motivation for entering public service.
What I do on a daily basis at our hospital is just, it's my next step. I live a life dedicated to service. It's service to others.
He came to Roseland during a period of turmoil, serving first as president and chief restructuring officer, then chief executive officer.
When I first got here, you couldn't get the employees to look up. Everybody was just so depressed, and there was no hope. Now we've given everyone hope, and everyone's trying to move this hospital forward.
Among the moves under Egan's leadership, changing the management of the hospital's emergency department from a contractor to a wholly owned subsidiary of Roseland in October of 2020. Then, that December, the subsidiary signed a 3-year, $10,000 a month contract with P2C Healthcare Consulting, a company that registered with the state just a month earlier. P2C's manager has no apparent experience in healthcare. But Leonard Kanata is a lawyer and political consultant who's worked for at least one of Egan's political campaigns. Photos on social media show them trading gifts. In a 2011 LinkedIn endorsement, Egan called Kanata detail-oriented, determined, and destined to succeed in life. Canada did not respond to a request for comment. Egan's spokesperson didn't answer questions about the political relationship between Canada and Egan, saying only that the Emergency Department Services contract with P2C significantly lowered the costs to Roseland, including lower insurance costs. This arrangement was arrived at in collaboration with and with the approval of the Roseland Community Hospital Board. During the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic, Roseland Community Hospital was hit hard.
We are saving lives, but we've got gurneys up against desks. We've got people that are overwhelming our emergency department. We're doing the best we can, and I can't commend our staff enough.
The hospital was a hub for treatment and for testing, but Roseland also did off-site testing. In at least 2 instances during 2020, the hospital offered COVID testing in the 2nd ward. Egan's political home base, a majority white and far more affluent part of town than the 86% black service area the hospital covers. One of those was here in the upscale Gold Coast, another in Wicker Park. In a statement, Roseland and Egan's spokesperson said Roseland Community Hospital makes no apologies for its effort to assist the City of Chicago Department of Public Health and other public health authorities in making COVID-19 testing available to as many people as possible. In addition, political funds Egan controls have taken in nearly $100,000 in donations, loans, and in-kind contributions since 2006 from people and businesses associated with Roseland and Norwegian American, where Egan's held leadership roles. State records show Roseland's former emergency department director has given $14,000. He didn't respond to a request for comment. The head of the CPA firm that prepares the hospital's tax returns and audits its financial statements has given too. Enrique Lopez and his company have made more than $7,000 in donations and in-kind contributions. In addition, Lopez serves as treasurer for one of Egan's campaign funds. U of I accountancy professor Angel Chatterton says those political and financial ties could make outside observers question whether the audits conducted by Lopez's firm are swayed by undue influence from hospital leadership.
Auditors not only need to be objective, they need to be perceived as objective as well. And that's at the heart of our credibility of our profession.
Chatterton says the relationship between Roseland, CEO Egan, and CPA Lopez may well be above board, but cautioned.
When you're dealing with any type of political situations like this, I would say additional safeguards need to be put into play.
Lopez did not respond to a request for comment. The spokesperson said Egan, quote, is grateful for the excellent work of the hospital's auditor, who holds his firm up to the highest standards of professionalism. Mr. Egan complies with Roseland Community Hospital Board policies and procedures, including those addressing disclosure and potential conflicts of interest. Hospital governance expert Jamie Orlikoff says Egan's apparent endorsements and the blending of his political and professional lives could cross ethical lines. As for whether having an actual elected official as CEO is unusual,
Unusual in the United States? Yes. Unusual in Chicago or Cook County? No. But even so, it is a bit unusual, there's no question. And so just on the face of it, you think it's inappropriate, and it likely is inappropriate.
But Orlikoff also says given the immense pressure hospitals are facing, having an experienced political operator at the helm could be beneficial. Loyola University's Brunson says technically the only punishment at the IRS's disposal for a nonprofit violating the rule barring political endorsements is revoking its tax-exempt status. He says that essentially never happens, but he does warn that an endorsement poses a risk if that candidate does not get elected.
And now they're on the outs with whoever got the office. So there's potentially some harm to the hospital itself.
In a statement, the chair of the hospital's board told WTTW News and ProPublica that the board is fully aware of Egan's political activities and that they don't cause any conflicts of interest for the hospital.
And Nick, this piece follows up on your previous reporting about Roseland in October. Remind us of that story.
That's right, Brandis. WTTW News and ProPublica reported that since January of 2020, federal inspectors found that errors or neglect had contributed to the deaths of at least 7 Roseland patients, including one who was pregnant. Watchdogs ordered the hospital to take corrective action, which records show it did. The spokesperson and a top hospital official told us that the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated many of the issues that Roseland has been dealing with. We've got more about that story and much more about the hospital's ties to politics on our website.
All right, great reporting, Nick, as usual. Thank you.
Thank you.
It could be a game changer for several communities on the far south side. City Council's approval of $950 million in TIF money for the Red Line South extension means the terminus could move from 95th down to 130th, adjacent to the historic public housing community called Altgeld Gardens. The community is a birthplace of sorts of the modern environmental justice movement, the movement to desegregate public housing, and was where a young community organizer named Barack Obama cut his teeth when he first looked to enter politics. And it is where Paris Schutz and producer Blair Paddock spent the day as part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. Paris joins us now outside the Altgeld Public Library branch. Paris. Paris, can you hear me?
Organizers and residents here in Altgeld Gardens were jumping for joy yesterday when that vote came down to approve up to $950 million in tax increment financing for the extension of the Red Line South from 95th to 130th. This is a project that's been talked about as far back as the 1950s, and residents here hope that it's a game changer for this community. Right now, if you want to go from Altgeld Gardens to the Loop, you got to take the 34 Michigan bus to the Red Line. That could be a half-an-hour journey, so this is going to shorten that time a whole lot. Now, Abraham Lacey at the Far South Community Development Corporation says groups like his have fought for this for generations.
An area that's been disconnected for 60 years now is being connected to the city is monumental. One, because Altgeld was set up to be segregated from the rest of the city so that it would put more of the black community away from the city, and especially away from downtown. To have that there is going to allow them to be able to get to jobs that they couldn't apply for before or would take forever to get to.
And then there's the added benefit of building these new train stations at 130th and a few other intersections, hopefully spurring on badly needed development, because here at 130th and Altgeld Gardens, there's nearly nothing in the way of retail or food options in this community or in the immediate surrounding area. U of I historian Lou Turner, who has been studying public housing in Altgeld Gardens for decades, says he hopes this extension changes all of that.
The Red Line extension at its stops at 111th, 115th, would actually generate new business development, commercial development, which would begin to circulate those dollars within the community so that people don't have to go outside of their community. At Altgeld Gardens, there's absolutely nothing there in terms of grocery stores or any kinds of amenities.
And that development is exactly the plan and the hope, according to Lee Mooney, who is the CTA's project manager for this Red Line extension project.
Part of what that really means here is balanced development. So one of the messages that we've gotten from doing community outreach is that we need to both be bringing in new development and economic investment and spurring that growth, but we also need to be careful and mindful that we're creating opportunities for the community that's already there.
Altgeld Gardens is rich with history here on the south side. It was first built to house Black War industry workers, veterans, and southern migrants. It quickly incurred the nickname the Toxic Donut, and that's because industry is all around us here. Not only industry, but landfill. Not only landfill, but this site itself had been chock full of asbestos. That led to activists like Hazel Johnson, who took the fight for economic justice to the city and then to the nation. And then after that came Dorothy Gautreaux, a resident who sued the CHA for discriminatory housing practices. That lawsuit, for those that followed this, went on for years and years and years. The settlement here has the potential to change public housing in Chicago and across the nation for good. But Turner says that legacy of environmental racism still persists for residents here today.
And so what began as a model city or urban design by the 1960s and 70s, really 60s and 70s had become a toxic waste site.
And it's not just a transit desert and a former toxic waste site here, but a food desert as well, as we talked about. Dolores Lucas runs an organization called We Keep You Rollin' Bike and Wellness Group. She says the nearest place to get fresh food is the Walmart, and boy, it is a labyrinth to get there.
The way it stands now, you need 3 buses to get to Walmart, and that doesn't make good sense. We're on 130th, and Walmart is on 109th. We should have a Walmart shuttle bus that will shuttle not just Altgeld, but Golden Gate, Concordia, Riverside Village, Pangea. These are all neighborhoods along the route that they could service and then take us to Walmart to shop.
And Lucas has not only fought for that red line extension as other community organizers have here, but she fought for a new bike path. She fought for new pedestrian signals. She got all of those things because it's about an all-of-the-above transit strategy. That red line extension is going to help, but folks here need ways to get to stores, to get to school, to get to fresh food options, and hopefully all of that is coming. Now, when we come back, we're going to speak with the daughter of that legendary activist, Hazel Johnson, Cheryl Johnson, who is continuing the work that her mother started so many years ago. But Brandis, now we toss it back to you.
A lot of history in that community, Paris. Thank you. A just-filed lawsuit claims that Cook County's process for dealing with homeowners who fail to pay property taxes is not only racist, but also illegal. Amanda Vitnicki joins us now with the details. Amanda, how does this work?
Well, Brandis, when homeowners can't or don't pay their property taxes for more than a year, Cook County holds what is called a property tax sale. A lawsuit brought by 2 black homeowners caught up in the system on behalf of themselves, as well as anyone else who is as well, alleges the process violates the Constitution and both federal and state civil rights laws. Now, before we get into the suit, a quick primer on what exactly this system is. Governments, of course, depend on people paying their property taxes. That's what funds schools, libraries, and police. When folks don't, Cook County sells the overdue taxes to a person, business, often a hedge fund, that pays the bill. The homeowner then has to pay back that tax buyer. Not just the overdue taxes, but also some 18% in interest and fees. If the homeowner cannot do that, they can lose their lien and title to their home, as well as the equity they had built. As the lawsuit points out, neither the county nor the taxpayer has to pay the homeowner for that loss of equity. Unlike a bank mortgage foreclosure sale where amounts realized in excess of debt owed on the property are returned to the owner, a property tax sale can ultimately result in a total loss to the homeowner of not just the home, but also the entire value of the home over and above the taxes and related charges. Attorney John Bowman, who's representing the plaintiffs, is honing in on that loss of equity. He says, distinct from the home itself, homeowners have a right to their equity.
They own the equity too. This is what you insure when you buy homeowners insurance, right? It's the value of the property. And by taking this away from people without any compensation, it violates the provisions of the Constitution.
He alleges several constitutional issues: the taking of property without compensation, government interference with property rights without due process, and the government unduly punishing people, which he says is exactly what this is.
You were unable to pay your taxes, fine, you're going to lose your house, but you shouldn't have to also lose the equity in the house.
He says that's particularly the case for people of color who are most impacted.
It's another in a long line of things that have prevented home ownership and wealth passing from one generation to the next, what's known as the racial wealth gap, which is something like 10 to 1 in terms of net worth of white families compared to black families. This is one of the pillars of it.
And he says that is a violation of both the Federal Fair Housing Act and Illinois' Civil Rights Act. Bowman says the lawsuit isn't going after the county's right to take action to get the taxes governments are owed, but it does seek to compensate those impacted for what he calls the needless punitive part of the system, that loss of equity.
And Amanda, of course, this suit has been filed against the Cook County Treasurer. What's the reaction there?
Yeah, so the defendant in this case is Maria Pappas, and this is in her official capacity as the treasurer of Cook County. Now, she is essentially compelled to go through these tax sale motions. It is a state law that sets up this whole process. And unsurprisingly, it is a federal lawsuit after all. Her office didn't have much of a reaction, issuing a statement saying, "We do not comment on pending litigation. The matter will be handled by the Cook County State's Attorney's Office." But Pappas herself has been openly critical of the tax sale process. In a story by our Paris Schutz just last month, Pappas condemned it as preying on the county's most vulnerable residents and says she wants state lawmakers to make significant changes.
It's a legalized racket that we need to break up, and we're going to do it.
Pappas has specific ideas for changing the process, but there is no firm legislation yet. The proposal, as explained to Paris last month, did not specifically tackle the equity issue. Criticism of the tax sale system is not new, but that has not led to reform.
The reason we filed the lawsuit is that this has been hanging out there for a long, long time. And it hasn't, there hasn't been, Treasurer Pappas has talked about it in public. General Assembly hasn't taken any action. People are losing their equity year in and year out. And we wanted to stop the meter on that and to get at least that part, the home equity part of the system, under scrutiny in federal court.
Bowman says he is hopeful for change because he says the lawsuit could bring more attention to the issue. He also says the General Assembly has been giving more attention to issues of racial disparities. But those who make money off of the system are often not keen to lose that ability and argue there needs to be a mechanism to force people to pay their property taxes. Otherwise, who would? Because, Brandis, of course, nobody likes to pay their property taxes. Regardless of what happens with this, for the two plaintiffs, it could be too late. Again, they are seeking compensation, but the lawsuit says that both of these individuals were unable to pay their property tax bills due to health issues that caused them to lose their jobs. Bowman says one of the plaintiffs lost her home in Maywood. The other one has not yet been evicted, but did lose the title to his home in Chicago.
Okay, Amanda, thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, what's behind the Wintrust mural building that's seen from the Kennedy Expressway? Stay with us. Do you think there's been sort of a rethinking of how those events happened here in Chicago?
I made a promise to myself in my career that every year I would make a piece of art dedicated to the memory.
Got into a zone of mentor to children. See what we can do to kind of elevate each other. We all we got at this point.
I'm using my past to push forward, to build a movement to create the world that we all want to see.
Have you ever been driving down the Kennedy Expressway and wondered who was behind the artwork seen on the Wintrust billboard? Arts correspondent Angel Edo shares exactly how Wintrust Bank partners with different organizations around the city to bring these creations to life.
It's one of the city's biggest and most visible forms of public art, easily seen from the Kennedy Expressway. With a 3-year waiting list, the Wintrust billboard is exclusive to Chicago nonprofits that have a partnership with the bank. December's creative partnership is with the Daniel Murphy Scholarship Fund.
A nonprofit is chosen, and then that nonprofit gets to pick whichever artist they would like to work with. You'll notice in the very top on the water tower is a Wintrust logo, because that's the only spot in which we can have a logo.
This month's Wintrust mural building was designed by Daniel Murphy alum Karen Spears. Her bright and encouraging message was blown up to match the size of the billboard, with all 3 sides weighing a total of nearly 1,500 pounds of vinyl mesh.
This moment feels so great, not to just represent Daniel Murphy, but to represent my city, the city that made me, and being able to share my art with hundreds of thousands of people driving past every day is so rewarding. This is a huge opportunity, but I would hope that it opens up more doors, not only for my artistry, but for millions of other people that now know who and what Daniel Murphy does for the city's young people.
So we are Chicago's largest high school scholarship granting organization. We have been around for 34 years.
Karen is an awesome representation of what we hope our Murphy Scholars become. She's an artist, she's an entrepreneur, she's a businesswoman, and so she really is just the example of what we hope Murphy Scholars become. They are born leaders, and we just help cultivate that passion, that interest.
Words have power, and art has the ability to inspire. And so in designing this Wintrust mural, the biggest thing that I wanted to incorporate into the design are powerful words with eye-catching colors.
It's Spears' eye-catching calligraphy that reads uplifting tomorrow's leaders that sets the tone for a 3-part story that depicts what the organization described as lifelong support.
The second panel features 3 scholars, young people who are going through high school, and the swirls really represent the support that Daniel Murphy offers throughout the program. And the last panel represents them embarking the big city. They're adults now, and they've gone through the program with the people that they started with, and now they're embarking in this journey of career together. And so that really summed up my personal journey as a Daniel Murphy Scholar, and I wanted that reflected in the pieces.
And while this mural, like the rest, is only up for a month, Wintrust says they've seen the support each organization receives extend beyond the duration of the billboard residency.
I think it's a really great chance to catch people when they're not expecting it. You're not in a museum, you're kind of captive. So it's this really great chance to show people art in an otherwise, daily dredge.
Even encourage more young people to be like me, bright-eyed Karen in 8th grade, wanting more for herself and more for her family. It's a truly, full circle moment that I hope that more young people get involved with the organization.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
And you can catch Spears and Daniel Murphy's Uplifting Tomorrow's Leaders billboard from the Kennedy Expressway at North Avenue now through the end of the year. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, residents in Altgeld Gardens are undertaking environmental efforts for their neighborhood. That and more from Chicago's far south side. It's that time of the year. Holidays, presents, and a spike in heart attacks. A look at why that is and how you or someone you love can avoid a trip to the hospital. And he's been in sports broadcasting for 50 years and calling play-by-play for NBA games for 25. Chuck Swirsky talks about his career and his new book, Always a Pleasure. But first, some more of today's top stories. Today marks the 2-year anniversary of the first COVID-19 vaccines administered in Chicago. Since 2020, more than 5.6 million vaccines have been administered in the city, and more than 2 million Chicagoans have received at least 1 dose of the vaccine. Chicago's top doctor says the pandemic is far from over.
We are on the increase again from COVID-19. We're seeing about 600 Chicagoans a day being diagnosed with COVID-19 in formal settings.
The city's health department says unvaccinated Chicagoans are twice as likely to get COVID compared to those who are up to date with their vaccines and boosters, and 3 times more likely to be hospitalized. The latest report assessing the Chicago's police department finds that it is making, quote, significant progress toward the implementation of reforms. The report by independent monitor Maggie Hickey finds CPD reached preliminary compliance with 78% of the monitorable paragraphs to date. This includes critical updates to policies, procedures, and training. The consent decree requires the department continue to train officers and personnel, provide meaningful supervision, and demonstrate reforms that are ingrained into daily practices through transparent data. Governor J.B. Pritzker issues a proclamation making the state's new constitutional amendment official.
I said we were going to ban 3 words from the dictionaries of the state of Illinois, right to work. Well, today we're actually getting that done. Every worker from Chicago to Peoria to East St. Louis now has the constitutional right to organize their workplace no matter what.
What advocates have called the Workers' Rights Amendment guarantees the constitutional right to collective bargaining. It passed with 54.5% of total ballots in last month's midterm election. Under Illinois law, the governor must issue an official proclamation announcing the passage of a constitutional amendment after it's certified by the State Board of Elections. Chicago extends the deadline for its Resiliency Relief Program. The program is providing $500 relief payments to up to 4,000 eligible Chicagoans. More than 2,000 awards are still available, and Chicagoans now have until the end of the month to apply. Those who claimed a dependent on their 2019 taxes may be eligible to apply. And now back to Paris Schutz, who spent the day in Altgeld Gardens as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. Paris.
As we talked about the history here, perhaps we neglected to talk about the most famous part of the history. A young community organizer, when he came to Chicago after Harvard Law School to organize, he came to Altgeld Gardens. His name was Barack Obama. But he might not be the most famous organizer here, because everywhere you go, street signs, paintings, it's Hazel Johnson who really made the cause of environmental justice famous throughout the nation. And so earlier today, we spoke with her daughter, Cheryl Johnson, who is keeping that legacy alive. I began by asking Cheryl her take on the Red Line extension news.
But actually, it's going to be a positive game changer for our community. We have been so disinvested in so many decades. So to have a major infrastructure development like this come down to our community, it's a great opportunity. And it reduced the tremendous overload that we have on the 34 Michigan bus that take people from here to 95th.
So there'll be more options here. You talk about disinvestment here. Altgeld Gardens, going way back, has had a history of environmental problems, asbestos problems in the ground, landfill over there, industry everywhere. Has any of that improved over the years?
Over the years, I can say that it has improved because we have new environmental policies that protect, and there's a lot of issues around cumulative impacts that we are addressing from all levels of government. So when you look at these environmental policies, it's supposed to improve the quality of life of exposures, you know, like we talk about particulate matter in our community. That's come from emissions from these smokestacks. We don't have that as much as tonnage of pollutants in the air like we used to. We got hundreds of thousands, but we don't have the millions no more that was emitted in our air every day.
Okay, so that's a huge improvement. Obviously, this work that you do, it's the family business. Your mother, Hazel Johnson, a legend down here. So remind our viewers what her life's work was about.
Her life work was about is connecting industrial pollution to public health issues. She was able to say that, you know, during the time that we got started in the 70s, you know, there was a movement around Earth Day, save the whales, save the trees. But we got to save human health that has been exposed to industrial pollution. So she would really spearmark looking at urban environmental pollution and its negative impact on community, and particularly community of color. The asthma rate, the cancer rate, the cluster of cancer. We learned that we had the highest incidence of cancer than any other area in the city of Chicago based on zip code. And we was #1. And we made the connection, and she called our community the Toxic Donut. We liken the center of the donut, outside the parameters, over 350 polluting entities, 50 documented landfills, 250 underground leaky storage tanks, just a host of 19 miles of waterways contaminated.
It was a perfect storm of environmental contamination. In fact, we have a clip of your mother talking about what it was like to live in Altgeld Gardens because of that.
It's like living in hell because of the odor that makes you sick all the time. And it's sickening to know that the people in our area is an isolated area, is a forgotten area that no one cares about.
What has changed as a result of the work that she did over all those years and the awareness that she raised?
Well, actually, you know, from working from a national level to see that the President Biden mentioned environmental issues, environmental justice, and the disinvestment that is associated with environmental justice issues in our community. That's a huge, because he allocated resources to have frontline community to get the resources needed to make changes in their community. It's a slow process, but it's a happening process. But in my years of experience with working with PCR for nearly 40 years, I can see that we're talking about alternative energy, for an example, something my mother talked about here. She said windmill. We call them wind turbines. Mm-hmm. You know, she talked about that we need to change the way that we with alternative energy, we need to stop using fossil fuel, for an example. She didn't say solar panel, but she said we need alternatives. And today, the things she talked about 30 years ago is the things that we are trying to address right now today.
That was our conversation with Cheryl Johnson, and we're going to be back with more on life in Altgeld Gardens, past, present, future in just a bit. But Brandis, we toss it back to you.
All right, Paris, thanks. We'll see you soon. It is the most wonderful time of the year, but it is also a time when heart attacks and strokes spike. Research shows heart attacks spike by 30 to 40% just in the last 2 weeks of the year alone. Here to explain what it is about the end of the year holiday season that causes this increase and what to look out for is Dr. Donald Lloyd-Jones, Chair of Preventive Medicine at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine and a Northwestern Medicine cardiologist. Dr. Lloyd-Jones, thank you for joining us.
Great to be with you, Brandis. Thanks.
Explain first, if you would, the cold weather and how that's a factor this time of year.
Yeah, what you said is really important. You know, there are over 1.2 million heart attacks in the United States each year, about 25,000 a week. But in these last 2 weeks of the year, we do see this huge spike. It's short, it's sharp. Some of it probably is related to the weather. The cold air, when we breathe that in, cools the blood, and that cold blood can actually cause our arteries to constrict. So if you already have compromised blood flow to your heart muscle, and those arteries constrict a little bit more, that can actually limit the blood supply to the heart and create a mismatch of demand and supply.
I would imagine some of the other factors around the holidays, stress, eating, drinking.
Absolutely. So I think, you know, the holidays can often knock us off of our routines. People are traveling, they might forget their medications, or they might forget to take their medications on time. Add to that overindulging in food, maybe overindulging in alcohol, but also maybe the stress of being with in-laws or, you know, not getting as much sleep as usual. When we get knocked off our routines, it is a stress test for the heart.
And stress, just all the things that we have to do around the holidays usually. What are some of the symptoms that folks need to look out for?
Yeah, so the kind of classic symptoms of a heart attack are heavy crushing pressure in the middle of the chest or sudden onset of severe shortness of breath. But in women, those symptoms may be a little bit different. Sometimes it's just sudden profound fatigue or sudden lightheadedness or dizziness. If you have any of those symptoms, it's really not worth messing around with it. Call 911 or get yourself to the emergency room as quickly as possible.
And you point to symptoms being a little bit different for women. Why is that?
Well, I think a lot of reasons, and we don't really fully understand all of them for sure. But women's anatomy is a little bit different than men's. And also hormonal influences can sometimes change the way our nerves report back to the brain.
As a result, sometimes a heart attack in a woman might be mistaken for something else or missed.
Yeah, that's correct. Unfortunately, we do miss more heart attacks in women, and too many people actually dismiss chest symptoms in women as well. That couldn't be heart disease, but all too often it really is.
Strokes also spike this time of year. Why is that, and what do we need to look out for?
Well, so the things that underlie heart attack and stroke risk are really identical. Things like blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, smoking, even just age. So they do travel together. People need to look out particularly for stroke because every single minute counts if you're having a stroke. So sudden facial drooping, weakness in one arm or one leg that's new, speech difficulty. These are the things that tell you it's time to call 911.
Is there a sort of an acronym to help folks remember that?
There is. So I just alluded to it. It's FAST. Face drooping is F. Arm or leg weakness on one side is A. S is speech difficulty. T is time to call 911.
All that adds up. How do we avoid this? How do we avoid all of the sort of the factors that can lead to this illness?
Yeah, I think, you know, time for self-care. Make that a gift to yourself this holiday season as well. Make sure you're staying on your sleep routine and getting plenty of sleep. Don't overindulge in alcohol. Don't overindulge in too much food. Make sure you take your medications and really just try to enjoy the season and avoid some of those stressors.
How do you avoid the in-laws?
That one might be hard.
Doctor's orders?
Doctor's orders.
There
absolutely.
You go. All right, Dr. Donald Lloyd-Jones, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Great to be with you.
Up next, a familiar voice to Chicago Bulls fans, but first, a look at the weather. Chicago Bulls fans will recognize our next guest since he's been the radio play-by-play voice for the team since 2008. Chuck Swirsky's broadcasting career spans 50 years, and this one is his 25th as an NBA broadcaster. This pioneer of Chicago sports talk radio has also covered many iconic moments in sports history, and Chuck Swirsky joins us now to talk about his career and his new book. It's called Always a Pleasure. And Chuck Swirsky, it is a pleasure to have you here on Chicago Tonight. Welcome back.
Thank you so much.
So before we get into the sports and the sports broadcasting, I want to know a little bit more about your mother because you describe her as the single biggest influence in your life.
Yes. She was a school teacher. She raised 3 children. My father died when I was in the 6th grade. She took on 2 additional jobs. She was working 3 jobs simultaneously and was an unbelievable human being. I mean, she never complained. Her work ethic was off the charts. She had a great personality. She had that Italian fire in her, and it was a wonderful experience. It really was.
What of her and of all of that you just named did you take? How are you like her?
Good question. I would say, well, I mean, she was unique. I will never compare myself with her, but I will say this. She was compassionate. She was kind. She was giving. She was selfless.
One of the things that stands out in the book is just how fortunate you were to have so many positive mentors and influences as you were finding your way in the world of sports. Tell us about a couple of those.
Well, a couple of them. Vince Bagley, who was the TV sports anchor in Baltimore. And I traveled from Seattle, where I grew up, to Baltimore every summer, stayed with the family, would take the drive from his home to WBAL TV every single night, would watch him anchor 6, 11 o'clock sports, go to Orioles games, Brooks Robinson, Frank Robinson, would go to Colts practices, Johnny Unitas, number 19 of the Baltimore Colts. And I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean, Ernie Harwell, the Hall of Fame voice of the Detroit Tigers. I mean, Joe Tate, who was an incredible basketball play-by-play announcer for the Cleveland Cavaliers, but other individuals outside of sports that basically said, okay, guess what? You need guidance, you need direction, and I'm here to help. And without that mentorship and leadership, I wouldn't be where I am today.
What everybody needs to be successful.
Yes.
Fast forward to your first stint in Chicago. You packed a lot into those years. So let's start with becoming a pioneer in sports talk radio with WCFL. How did that come about?
That came about because a headhunter called me. I was doing sports talk in Columbus, Ohio. Out of the blue, I get a call. Hey, we have an opening. And I said, what? I thought it was a friend. And I hung up because I was ready to go on the air. I thought it was a prank call. And he calls back and says, don't do that again, or good luck to you. So the first night we're on the air, WCFL, we got 2 calls, 4-hour program, because we were the lowest rated 50,000 watt station in American broadcast history. We had no commercials. So I ended up interviewing myself. Chuck, what do you think of the Cubs? Good question. And so we had 2 calls. One was the wrong number, and I kept her on the line for 20 minutes. Oh, wow. And the other was ordering pizza. And that's how I learned about deep dish pizza. Because not being from Chicago, I was unfamiliar with deep dish pizza. And that was my first night on the air.
What was it like working with Steve Dahl?
Steve Dahl was interesting from the standpoint that he was a pioneer in rock and roll radio. He was Howard Stern before Howard Stern. And I'll tell you what, I have a lot of respect for Steve because he put his mark on a map. It was uncharted waters, and Steve Dahl, to this day, if you talk about the history of rock and roll radio, the history of communicators in our business, Steve Dahl would be in the first chapter.
You were also in Chicago for the Bears Super Bowl win, the Bulls' first three-peat run. Yep. That must have been an incredible time to be a sports broadcaster in Chicago. How do you remember it?
I remember the '85 Bears with Jim McMahon, Walter Payton. I mean, you could go right down the list. There were so many characters. The Fridge, the Danimal. I mean, you had Mike Singletary, and on and on and on. It was, and of course, the coach. I mean, the '85 Bears, as far as Chicago sports is concerned, you will be able to talk about the '85 Bears in 85 years. That's what they did for this city. They were not only Chicago's team, they replaced Dallas as America's team during that window.
I'm sure a lot of Bears fans are hoping that we don't have to wait another 85 years.
Agreed. Good point there.
So fast forwarding again, in 2008, the Bulls come knocking. What tempted you back to Chicago? Because at the time, you were in Toronto and fairly happy.
Yes. Loved the Raptors, loved Toronto, loved the ownership. But it took one call, and not only the Bulls brand, but the Reinsdorf name. I love Jerry, love Michael. It is a great family, and not because of X's and O's and championships and whatnot. It's because of what they're doing in the community for families, for children, for schools, for charities. To me, that speaks volumes. So when the Bulls called, I said, let's go for it.
All right. So you're now in your 25th season as an NBA broadcaster, and your enthusiasm for the game, I'm talking to you right now, seems undiminished. A lot of folks that, you know, who've known and worked for you and with you will talk about how positive you are. Where does that positivity come from?
Well, it started with my mom and my grandmother, who was from Sicily, and mentors along the way. But here's the thing. If you find something that you're very passionate about, whether it's broadcasting, whether it's teaching, whether it's law, whatever the case may be, and you embrace that, and you gravitate to something that you truly, truly love each and every day, like I do, calling Bulls basketball and being around the game and being around the players, being around the coaches, being around people in the sport, I love it. And so here I am, 25 years later, ready to call my 2000th NBA game next month. And I'm still fired up like I was a 7-year-old calling a game off of TV in my house.
The 4 Ps.
Yes.
We've got about 30 seconds.
Yes.
What are they?
Purpose, positivity, passion, and most importantly, perseverance. Because life is not a straight line. You're going to get knocked down, but you always bounce right back up.
Words of wisdom from Chuck Swirsky. Congrats on the new book. Thank you so much for joining us. And Chuck Swirsky's new book is called Always a Pleasure. You can read an excerpt on our website. And there's more Chicago Tonight just ahead, so stick around. And now we check back in with Paris Schutz, who spent the day in Altgeld Gardens as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. Paris.
Brandon, so residents here know about Chuck Swirsky's 4 Ps because they've been knocked down, but they keep getting back up. And now I'm joined by longtime resident and community organizer Nathaniel Jenkins. You've lived here for 32 of your 37 years. Have the environmental conditions improved, and what still remains a problem?
I think the environmental conditions improved just a little bit because of people like Cheryl Johnson and Hazel Johnson, because just through the years, you can tell it's getting a little bit better, but it still is a problem because it's still people, grandparents dying now over cancer. And like right now, I have bronchitis. And, you know, it's a lot of people out here with asthma and stuff, and it's all because of, well, a lot of it is because of the environment and the industries and the wasteland that we live around.
Are you worried about your future then, given what you've been exposed to?
Yes, I'm very worried about my future and like the kids in the community future and everybody else's future out here. I mean, I go to the doctor regularly to check on just my health, and I would hope that everybody else do, because it is a problem that can overall, when you get older, become a deeper problem.
And when we talk to residents here, the number one thing they keep saying is they feel like they're on an island here. Not a lot in the way of food options, public transit. Does it feel like that this is kind of an island, forgotten a little bit?
Yes, especially like back in the day, it used to really feel like an island, but now with like just having your own transportation is like really a must, because the farm, we had that as a store that we can go get food products and stuff like that. It's not there anymore, so you really have to get on a bus or a train to get food and stuff like that. So yeah, it do feel like an island if you don't have any transportation.
And now this announcement of funding for the Red Line extension, if it happens, I mean, it's going to be a few years away. Do you think that will help things?
I think that'll help things a whole lot. I think that'll change a lot, just because if you can just actually get on the train from out here and be on the train and go downtown and go to other places, if you have opportunity to just do different things and create a better living for yourself, actually.
It's getting much needed, and everyone jumping for joy with that vote yesterday. We mentioned Barack Obama. When he came to Chicago, he came to Altgeld Gardens to organize. You've been here for 32 years. Were you around for any of that?
Yes, I actually synced Barack Obama when he was out here. I got a chance to see him. I didn't. He was the senator then. I didn't get a chance to shake his hand or nothing, but I was close, you know. So I actually had a chance to see him, and it was good to know that I synced him, and then he became the president.
Started right here. This is where the journey began. All right, Nathaniel Jenkins, thank you so much for joining us. Stay warm. All right, all the best. All right, Brandis, that's it from Altgeld Gardens. We'll close the show with you in just a bit, but I'm going to toss it back to you for now.
All right, Paris, thank you. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that is our show for this Thursday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
And you can get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And join us, as always, tomorrow night, live at 7 for the Week in Review. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I am Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible in part by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, wishing all a happy and healthy holiday season.